guys need help? Not that I'm any good at it.
Hi.
I think we're all set.
We never farmed Daniel.
Okay, so that's working, so, but I'm not a tech genius by any means, but I keep trying. The Bose thing should be hooked up to that, so if you want sound.
We decided to use our
Okay.
our machine.
All right, I'll get out of the way.
Yeah.
So you want me to just do some videos?
Some video.
Feel free to take your seats. We're going to get started soon.
The purpose is for social media, right? The videos?
Sorry, for YouTube.
Okay. Very cool. Very, very. Hi, Victor. Jason. Tyler. Yeah, I think it's like the party's out there.
Stop mingling. Hello everyone, thank you for coming. This is our very first event at Cattletrack, our new campus. Thank you. I'm really pleased to be sharing the stage with our speakers tonight. And it's really great to see faculty, students, alum, wider the members of the wider community. Thank you so much for coming. This is not only the first event of the semester, but also the first event of a series for 23-24, so both for fall and spring. We're hosting a year-long event series called The Shapes of Pedagogy. This series explores the spaces, structures, and practices of experimental pedagogy in architectural education. We'll be exploring this theme through a series of speaking events, potentially workshops. Next week we'll be hosting an open house, so this will be a kind of interactive introduction to the school. We'll have students and faculty presenting their work both within the institution and outside of it. And we'll also get a chance to meet members of the Cattletrack artist community and Janie Ellis, who's also here tonight, as part of this event. And we're really thankful for the Cattletrack artists for making us feel so welcome. So thank you again. Today, we're really focusing on the various eras of transition at the school through the decades. During the open house, students and faculty will really be put in the spotlight. So this is part of a two-part series. Please be sure to come to the next event. And then following that, on November 10th, we'll have a curator from the MFA in Boston who will be talking about her research on craft schools, including TSOA, as part of her ongoing research. I'd like to introduce the speakers. Just a note on format, the speakers will be unpacking the educational model at TSOA as it's evolved, adapted, and transitioned through a range of circumstances, which we'll expand on. And each speaker will do a 10 to 15 minute presentation of their educational experience at the school, pointing out what transitions were happening at the time and how this may have propelled and defined what we would call an experimental pedagogy. So the first speaker will be John Sather, founding partner at Swaback Architects and Planners. He's a Taliesin Fellow and was an apprentice from 1974 to 1978. Through Swaback, John has been involved in virtually all of its award-winning community design and architectural projects for over 40 years. He's a skilled strategist, manager, land planner, and architect. His land planning involvements include some of the most environmentally sensitive projects in the Western United States, Hawaii, and Mexico. He's been involved in community design for both the public and private sectors. As such, he brings a perspective to planning projects that's extremely helpful in visioning, creating value, analyzing demand, creating markets, and entitlement strategies. He's been the principal community designer for large and small scale projects throughout the United States, Mexico, Asia, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. Our second speaker will be Victor Sidy, former head of school and dean from 2005 to 2015, class of 97 for his Bachelor of Architectural Science, and class of 2000 for his MArch. Victor is principal of Victor Sidy Architect. He's an educational leader and advocate for quality in the built environment. And while at the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture, he received the Flynn Foundation Scholarship and Robert C. Byrd Scholarship. Through practice, he's worked with artists, architects, and planners in Russia, the Netherlands, France, Vietnam, and throughout the United States. This part I didn't know. Victor hosted a television series on architecture for EMG, satellite television, that aired from 1996 to 98, and was the youngest member of Architecture Magazine's 1999 feature, Young Americans. Victor has been managing principal of the architectural firm Victor Sidy Inc., Victor Sidy Architects, since 2000, and is professor of practice for the Master of Real Estate Development program at the W.P. Carey School of Business at ASU. Our third speaker, Chris Lasch, is the current president of the school, as well as the former dean from 2016 to 2020. He's the principal of Lasch, based in Tucson and New York. Based in Tucson and New York, and established in 2003 with Benjamin Aranda. Lasch approaches design through a deep investigation of structures and materials. Recognition includes the United States Artist Award, Young Architects Award, Design Vanguard Award, AD Innovators, and the Architectural League Emerging Voices Award. Their early projects are the subject of the best-selling architecture book, Pamphlet Architecture 27, Tooling. Forgot there's another slide. Might be a little more interesting. And finally, I'm Stephanie Lin, the Dean since 2021, also principal of Present Forms. I'm based between Arizona and New York as well, and started my teaching career at Berkeley while I was still a grad student. My practice, Present Forms, combines artistic and architectural modes of thinking, ranging in scale from environments to objects, and covering embedded cultural narratives and hidden orders. In the spring of '22, I organized and designed the organic exhibition at TSOA, probing the multiple meanings of the term organic for architects and designers today. It's a little weird to introduce yourself after all those great introductions. I'm going to hand it over to Chris Lasch to give a little bit of context for the school before we hand it over to John Sather. Thank you.
So you're going to hear a lot about this school and tonight, and its many changes, its evolutions, and the kind of continuities that run through its long history. So I just want to give a kind of light introduction for the benefit of those who may be less familiar with the school, and to give some context for our students. The School of Architecture, as you may know, is one of the oldest independent architecture schools in the country. It began as the Taliesin Fellowship when 23 students arrived at Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin estate in Wisconsin to live, learn, and work as apprentices under Wright's tutelage. A few years later, the fellowship expanded to Arizona, where they set up a winter camp here, and for more than 80 of the last 80 years, we continued this migration back and forth between these two places. And as you'll see tonight, the school has evolved through that time, along with the kind of nature of education, going from this apprenticeship program to today being a fully accredited Master of Architecture program, with a few kind of interesting pedagogical stops along the way that we'll talk about tonight. But something that arguably has persisted throughout all this time is the school's immersive educational community and its emphasis on learning by doing. This is something that continues to this day, something that we practice at the school today, and tonight you'll see kind of more about what we mean by that, and how our kind of approaches to that has evolved over the years. But since this is a series on pedagogy, I thought that it puts me in mind of maybe setting the stage with a little bit of the intellectual origins of this learning by doing approach. And this has to do with John Dewey and his approach to progressive education, and the American pragmatism philosophical movement in general. Dewey's this is the kind of intellectual environment within which Wright would have been steeped at the turn of the century in Chicago, and I think has a lot of echoes in what we do up to today. So Dewey is the figure through his kind of progressive educational ideas, coined this term of learning by doing, and it was a reaction at the time to a kind of tradition of learning by rote, and a reaction to traditional methods of memorization, recitation, what he thought was a better way of operating, and kind of drawing on the American pragmatist line of thinking that goes back to transcendentalism, is an emphasis on experience, and that learning really takes place through experience, through having experiences, through doing stuff. And these were ideas that he was starting to put into practice in the philosophy department at University of Chicago, and through and modeling at the laboratory school at the University of Chicago around this time, where this kind of learning by doing, learning through experiments, learning through trial and error, these became the kind of hallmarks of a new model of education that I would propose that the Taliesin Fellowship was a kind of architectural instantiation of. I think these are the kind of animated ideas that drove a lot of Wright's work that you can see in kind of seminal projects such as the Broadacre City and the Usonian Homes project in the mid-20th century. This was a kind of approach to life and to the development of the individual that the Taliesin Fellowship was meant to support, the kind of environment that it was meant to foster as a way of developing architects, but also whole and creative people. So I think what will be interesting tonight is to kind of to track the enactment of this approach to learning throughout the eras, from the perspective of the people that will be speaking tonight, whose perspective on the school they will communicate, and going from the 60s to today, and looking ahead toward the future. So our first speaker is John Sather.
John Sather. If I don't have to use this, I would like not to. So somebody raise their hand if they can't hear me.
Should be fine. Yeah.
So when we got together to kind of formulate what we were going to do tonight, the real purpose is to help the students in an exploration of the pedagogy, the future of the school. It's at a really unique time, and actually there were times that I was a little bit depressed about this time, and now I'm really revved up about it. Because I think it's a time for the school to really become a little bit rebellious in the world of architecture and in the world of learning. And so in studying that, and I just got a bit of a dose of this. I took John Bernhardt, one of my partners who's here, and I took 40 of us to Wisconsin last week and did a road trip, some of our work and some of Wright's work. But it was just a total immersion into days of architecture, of discussion and things, much like you would have in school. And now that we're out in the practice, you're all distracted by all these things. So one of the things I wanted to do was to help the students a little bit in thinking about the pedagogy of the future and what this new campus, a new home might look like, that we look back to look to the future. So you can, this is a plan I've always loved. This is Wright's Okatia camp. So Wright came here roughly, and I'm not going to be the perfect historian on years here, but roughly call it 29. And where is this? This is in the middle of Mountain Park Ranch in southern Phoenix. So it is, this camp is on a knoll, was on a knoll. It's not there, there's nothing there now. It's a piece of preserved land, which is now completely surrounded with tract homes. But this is how Wright generally came down to the desert. And if you just look at the form of that and think of 29, and think that someone came here and built this, and that we built tent-like structures in the middle of the desert. So this, you know, at this point in time, these were hired employees, draftsmen for Wright. But you can begin to see the idea of those of us who were there. We lived in tents, and so way back in 29, they began to build these forms. And this was the drafting room. And just note things like kerosene lamps. And just today, I noticed this guy's Argyle socks underneath the drafting room. Look at this. I thought this was really good. But you know, this is in essence how, to some degree, what was percolating in Wright's brain at that time. And you know, this was a time, okay, I don't want to pay all those guys, I'll just bring in a bunch of students and charge them money. But the idea of this coming to the desert and building this kind of structure, you think about the future, and you think about the school now not really having a home other than what Janie has provided us here now, which is fabulous. What might happen in the future? And so it's just, you know, that part of it is what's so exciting. So then you roll on in years and you get into the early 30s, and Wright had built 3 hillside home schools, starting with his aunt, and then, you know, basically this was the beginning of where the school lived at Taliesin, roughly beginning in 32 when the fellowship formed. And attached to these structures began the drafting room construction. So that drafting room was, you know, milled out of oak trees that were on the site, and became the great drafting room that we all know today, which, you know, is somewhat of this abstract forest with light coming through it. So in that period of time, you know, they had left tents. They were in the beautiful rolling hills of Wisconsin. In this incredible space, and once again, this is like the 30s, so a lot of, you know, incredible stuff happening in there. So in those times, and we're kind of skipping a few years here because those who know an early picture of my partner Vern Swaback will know he's there. They were all basically learning from the master, from Wright, and so their pedagogy of education, the learning by doing, was working on actual buildings. So when Vern went, so he was 17 years old when he came to Taliesin as a student, and knew not how to draw, knew very little about architecture, but had what some of us, you know, really can't even explain inside of us what drew us there. So he was drawn there and spent up to 22, 23 years working under Wright and after Wright. So then the migration began. So it was in Wisconsin, and then now in the early 30s coming back to the desert. So there's a tweener time here before Taliesin West was really begun. So this is a picture taken in Chandler, that's the students building the famous Broadacre City model, which went on show in about 1935. So the pedagogy there, once again, learning by doing, was Wright had this idea of planning a Broadacre City, and so let's work it out in a model. He had no work at that time. So it was, okay, let's work on theory here, let's build this big model. This big model has traveled the world. It's one of the most famous, I think, land planning models that exists. So then back, still in the desert, the beginning of the construction of Taliesin West begins. So it's by students building at this point the famous desert masonry. So the learning by doing aspect here is now broadening from just building models and drafting to now let's begin and enter into construction. So in that period of time, a lot of the students were continuing the construction of Taliesin West. Those of us who came, so I came in the late 70s, we were still building at Taliesin West at the time. When we migrated to Wisconsin, the construction was more about maintaining the building. So This was the beginning of a much more well-rounded pedagogy where it wasn't just about drafting and learning about architecture, it was building architecture, it was cooking in the kitchen, it was singing in the choir, it was doing all these other things, but still surrounding the master studying drawings, doing architecture. So you can see here a photo of Wright with Ling Po. Ling Po was one of the Chinese students. A lot of Wright's renderings were done by Ling. So a little side story. I showed up in '74. I too did not know how to draw at the time. I was immersed into the drafting room at an incredibly heady period of time. So the drafting room was abuzz with work. The apprentices who were there during Wright's time, who then ultimately created what was known as Taliesin Associated Architects, had an incredible amount of work. I came in as this young student from Minnesota and just thrust into the drafting. And so the learning by doing was just beginning at that time. Now, my father was brought up in the construction trade, so the idea of apprenticeship was something that triggered in my mind. So that's really, we were often called apprentices. And so it was really like you might be a journeyman plumber or electrician. You would just start learning by shadowing that. We have a young student now over in our office who is very early in his career, and what he's doing is just shadowing architects and subliminally picking up stuff. He listens to conversations, he watches things. Something's percolating in his brain. So I was put in this drafting room and assigned to Ling Po. Ling Po quickly assessed I knew nothing. So he didn't say I knew nothing, he was incredibly encouraging. So he put me down and he said, why don't you begin to trace this rendering? So I began to just pick up tools and do that. Well, it was the throne room of the palace for the sister of the Shah of Iran. So this was all just incredibly heady stuff. But that's the exciting part of this school, is that this still can exist. This still happens. It's just in different forms. And as you can see here, the learning was not just in the drafting room, in the field of construction. This was what was known as the box project. So the box project started as kind of a gift to Wright. In our time, it was, we would design 2 buildings a year. The box was a box that one student would design to put the drawings in. So the idea of box was interesting because Wright spent his whole life destroying the box. So if you were assigned the box to design, your work would be, okay, design a box that's not a box, and let it contain a whole slew of drawings that were roughly, what were they, like 18 by 24. So this was the presentation, and in the learning by doing, you were standing in front of people like Mrs. Franklin Wright, Wesley Peters, John Nicopa Hill, John Rattenberry, and you were presenting as if they were your clients. And it was a tough presentation because, as you can see right there, Mrs. Wright kind of focused on this. She was definitely focused on every detail, and so the learning by doing was not only learning the skills of presentation, but dealing with the reactions to it. And then the other cultural part of Taliesin's life at the time, at that era, one of the things I point out is, if I was Vern Swaback, I would be telling you a different story from a different perspective. It would be the same story, but it would be through different eyes. And as Victor was there and others, it changed with eras. So what's good about the pedagogy study of the students now is looking back to look to the future. You don't have to copy the future. None of this was the same. So here we learned music. I was not as accomplished as, say, Victor was, but that was part of the cultural life. We had to learn to cook. So you'd say, why are you cooking? I mean, what does that mean in architecture? Well, as I was explaining when we were preparing for this, all of these tasks through my career at Swaback, which has now been 45 years, every one of them I have have used to an extent. I can very strongly stand and talk about kitchens that serve 80 people simply because I've worked in one. And the same with, I was saying, Vern and I ran the wastewater treatment plant. So you'd say, well, that's a pretty weird thing. I designed the Chaparral water treatment plant on the corner here that treats water. So as I made my presentation, that's a $100 million project, to the city of Scottsdale, they kind of turned heads when I say I actually operated a wastewater plant. So kitchen life, choir, singing, all these were cultural aspects that were part of the pedagogy of the school. This, once again, now we're into rite has passed. So now the students that were there at the time became, carried on his work and began to do their own works under the umbrella of Taliesin Associated Architects. So here you can see the architects working together. My desk would have been right off screen to the right. So I'm sitting there listening. A kid from Minneapolis who doesn't know anything about architecture is now picking this up subliminally. So it's the apprenticeship, it's the learning by doing, and ultimately, you know, you now have a much more formal drafting experience, and it continues with now the Taliesin Associated Architects, but now they are a very strong international firm, doing work all over, doing houses, doing a lot of auditoriums, doing unique facilities or buildings like the Palace for the Sister of the Shaw, and other unique projects. So this, it's not a very good picture, but the guy in the red shirt is me in a very active drafting room in Wisconsin. So this was a period of time in my period, through my lens, that just showed you know, the school in just a very fully immersive experience in architecture. Later, so I'm now gone. This is now the computers have entered the world, but you can see the life that went on in the school, and the students now are in another era. They're beginning to pick up the computer sciences that we also desperately rely on, and we now look into the future and we ought to say, okay, what's AI going to mean to architects? It's going to change our world completely. So when I talk about looking to the past to look to the future and a future pedagogy, it's change is okay. Embrace the change, deal with it, and create something that is exciting as these buildings, as these tools for living, but in a different lens. Still building students, building structures. This is where I lived for 5 years. And now the structures, which are very much a part of the current student's life. And now we come to a different era. So we come to an empty era. The life has changed. We are no longer occupying that drafting room or this drafting room. And so now the excitement begins in the study of what's the next chapter, because I think you can, you know, see in the evolution of these slides, going all the way back to Okatia, things changed all the time. So this is okay. It's okay to have this change. It's an exciting change. And so what is the future going to be? That we don't know, but that's what the exploration is. So I'll turn it over to Victor.
Great. I think I can speak loudly as long as the folks online can hear me. You think we'll be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, good to see all of you here, and those of you watching remotely. So I started. Okay, that's me. So the first few slides are illustrative of the 6 years that I spent as an apprentice or as a student in the 1990s at Taliesin. So we lived in the tents and learned from those who studied under Wright. The school had formalized at that point. The accreditors became a massive force, and they forced the school to become formalized during the time that John was at Taliesin. It was really more a free-for-all, or perhaps something a little bit more,
Less
unique
structure.
than that. Less structure, for sure. This was a project, I think I spent 80% of my time in the studio as well, but when I wasn't there, I built a shelter, which was a lot of fun. One of the reasons why this shelter was so important to me specifically was that it was a narrative, or a proxy for my experience vis-a-vis the legacy of Frank Lloyd Wright. So I came in as more of a young Turk, and became increasingly frustrated at this fact that at every turn you would hear about Frank Lloyd Wright. You would hear about how great he was, how this is how great it was in the good old days, and I, at a certain point, I had enough. I wanted to work in the way that some of my colleagues at other universities were working, so we were doing 3D design at that point, and most of the architects I knew or was working for were all hand done, that sort of thing. For me, doing this shelter, and you can see what it turned out to be, was a metaphor for this kind of new era superimposed upon the roots, or the foundation of what had come before me, and that contrast between this stolid stone and concrete base and what my imposition. I kind of claimed what a former apprentice had done, which was glass and steel, or in this case it was actually polycarbonate and steel, a little bit of wood, and there was an irony to my approach, which I felt that a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright's work was lacking irony, and as much as he felt that humor was important, I think there was a sense that in his work there was that lacking. So I during my time as a 20-something, I really hit hard against what I felt were the strictures of this legacy that had become petrified, in my opinion. And I say that in a loving way. I think there was a sense that there was a certain era ready to come to an end, and another era that was ready to start. I didn't realize how quickly that was going to start, though. And and by the way, this is another kind of interesting graphic, at least for vis-a-vis the conversations we're having today. You think about that time of Frank Lloyd Wright's era at Taliesin West and Taliesin. It really was only about 25 years or so, maybe 27 years. That's the red portion of the graphic. Then you have the yellow portion, which is the period of time that John was there. Olgivanna Lloyd Wright, roughly about the same amount of time, 1959 to 1984, so 25 years. And right around the time that she died, supposedly her dying wish to Tom Casey, who kind of picked up the pieces for the school when she passed away, was, you will get the school accredited. And so of course they got the school accredited. And that period of time from 1985 to the present time is actually a much longer duration of time than the other two eras, which I think is somewhat interesting. Where's the pointer? Is it this one? Oh, here. So I was here around that period of time, and then I left, and then I came back around this period of time and took over from Tom Casey. He was the last person who had studied under Wright that ran the school, and I was the first person who had never met Frank Lloyd Wright, who was taking on the leadership of the school. Actually, there was an interim dean that was also kind of in my footsteps, John Wyatt. But in any case, that was a marked change. There were certain transition issues. When we started the school, we had, I think, 8 students, which was a low in terms of enrollment. And what we had to do is figure out how to increase the enrollment. One of the things that we did was we kind of asked ourselves and the recent graduates, what would the school be like if you could make it your own? If you could invent a school, what would it be like? And I think at the present time, the students and faculty are really at that point again. There's that sense that, oh, we can turn the school into the coolest place, the best education, the one that works for us, and not the monster of the big university that's over our head, right, Ellen? This is our school, not someone else's school. I think that sense of empowerment was one of the things that made it really attractive, and very soon we tripled our enrollment and got students from all over the world. It was kind of a heady time. I was also kind of new at this. I came into my position with the understanding that I would be the co-dean and be the head of the school, side by side with Tom Casey, my predecessor. He passed away 2 months after I started, and leaving me kind of in the lurch and having to force me to kind of put my firm on ice, and it was a really difficult period of time for me, but also really exciting. The average age of the students was only a year or so less than me. I was, there was a sense of really collegiality. And I think the fact that we felt that we were inventing a new place was really critical. We also realized, and as forceful as I may have been as a student against the legacy, I realized that without that foundation, that underpinning of that history, we were basically just glass and steel floating in the wind. We needed to be rooted to the ground, and all of the wonderful things that represents, the sense of being in a place, the connection to the landscape that Wright always talks about. And then there were certain morsels of maybe touchstones that Wright and several other architects, a number of other architects, talked about that we felt were important as we were moving forward. In this particular case, Wright talks about education in a way as a way of life that's a basis for learning, to do something with integrity, to do something that has beauty, to add to this world a note of concordance, sympathy, and value. These are big words. You can go in many different directions with this, but at least for us, it was one of those anchor points as we tried to figure out what we were going to do in the next phase. We had a cycle of education that had started in 1937 when they made that migration back and forth between the Taliesins. There were, and so we looked at how would the schedule be organized: fall semester, spring semester, summer program. Is that the best way of doing it? This is kind of a example of some of the things that we were looking at. We tried to get as much buy-in from faculty and students on these sorts of things. This graphic is by Ari Georges, who was also trying to map out the faculty member who was trying to map out the program. And we created a core curriculum that was formal enough for the accreditors, but we felt was loose enough for the students and faculty to do what they wanted. We had the studios, the box projects, as John was mentioning, but kind of peppering that with additional projects, and then specific classes and independent studies, the idea of the independent studies being as important as anything else, or at least on par with the rest. Matthew Trevatowski should be giving this lecture because I think you were almost more involved in some of these than I was, and I think I still have PTSD from some of that. You probably still do too.
I think you just need to shock me right there.
Yeah, exactly, right. But the point was that it was an evolutionary practice. The idea of an architectural practice is something that we yearn to achieve in our own work, in our discipline. And to a certain degree, we were also very aware of the fact that this was a place that was founded on one of Wright's ideas was that it was going to be our, quote, little experiment. I love that phrase because in that one phrase, little experiment showed kind of the humility of it. It showed the adventuresome aspect of it, and it showed that it shouldn't be fixed. For Wright, it was all about reinvention, and for the school and the continued future of the school, I think that's very much part of what it could be. Here's a picture of some of the students soon after I started. We were kind of reclaiming the studio at that point. There was a lot of late nights. This picture could be from any university in the world probably, but it was certainly something that happened at the Taliesins. The presentations and the feedback, that's I think that's one of the core elements of architectural education, regardless of where it's which school it is. In our case, I think it was wonderful to see our colleagues, our students, and I know it continues today, to put on a different role, to be the presenters as opposed to the receivers, and then bringing in the critics from all over the world to witness their work. None of those things were necessarily different than other schools, but I think what was fascinating was to kind of get this mashup of the history of the school, its great past history of apprenticeship, and then superimpose that with some of the more maybe conventional ways of learning. Here's a class or a seminar with a number of our students, and then there's Lloyd, some of you know him, Kostas from, I think he was from the GSD at Harvard, leading the class. And so we started bringing in more folks from outside our sphere, and I think that period of time within the school was important. It also fulfilled some of the urges that I felt were lacking, some of the urges I wished I had when I was a student. I wished we had more people coming in from other places, having them learn from us and us learn from them. So that idea of always having a place that could be where the scholar in residence stayed, programmatically for those of you who are working on this studio, I think that's super critical. Getting out in the field, and what I love about this particular picture is that they're kind of in the studio and in the field simultaneously, and they're surveying maybe, but they're also designing at the same time. I don't quite know what they're doing otherwise. Here's Trevor working on his shelter, highly worked and almost decorated. He was building this just as he was an outgoing student as I was coming in as dean, and we had some spirited conversations about minimalism, which I don't think we're quite represented here, but in any case, it was a dramatic photograph and a fun place for him. Here was the master of minimalism, Michael Johnson, cleaning up after one of his studio projects, which was a 8-foot by 8-foot cube. And this was rather controversial, and the tiles actually fell off, just like in the hot summer. Here's Dave with his reclaiming of a shelter that had built in the 1960s. So a similar hermit crab a relationship to the history, and that learning by doing was really important, I think, for students to learn about welding, carpentry, pouring concrete, living in these cool shelters. Some of you have seen these images before, but learning about the welding at strange angles, and then turning that into what was ultimately, I think, a sculpture rather than a shelter. But Christian did claim that he slept here a few nights at least. Another element that we tried to bring back, and during your time, John, and when I was a student, Taliesin Architects was alive, well, and thriving, and we were working extremely hard in the studio. By 2002, after I had graduated, the firm pretty much folded. Some people said it collapsed. There was no architectural education in the studio, and there was this question: how can you learn by doing if you are not, or how can you apprentice if you're not really apprenticing to an architect? We tried to revive the architectural practice discipline by bringing in specialty clients who didn't come to us because we were a firm, but more because we were a school, and our working with students was something they were really excited about. It was a great opportunity to get that kind of, to connect our students to people who had ideas and money, and potentially being able to realize that. So that's what was going on here. This is the Mod Fab, which you might be familiar with, the project that students designed under the authoritarian regime of Michael Johnson, who was one of our faculty, and built it out of SIP panels, and then ultimately we use this as a scholar in residence place for visiting scholars. Elena, did you live here or no? You lived in the Apprentice Court or the Desert House? Yeah. Oh, you were there. Okay. Yeah. It was, in any case, it was fun. It came in to existence in 2009, right when the depths of the recession were happening, and it really touched a chord within the greater public. Dwell magazine called it one of the top 10 green architecture projects of the year. There was all sorts of press that we had, and I think that also buoyed us. It became another milestone for us in terms of saying, look, we can do something that's not Frank Lloyd Wright and still keep some of the elements of the program intact. There were wonderful moments that some of our students and faculty shared with visiting scholars such as Juhani Pallasmaa. Renzo Piano came for a day and a half and hung out with us and wished he could come back and be a student, he said. I don't know if he was just being nice, but there was that sense that he was just a regular guy, the nicest guy you've ever met, and he was a cool, pretty great architect as well. So the last few slides, and I'll hand it over to Chris, is some of those community experiences that I think John was talking about. The kitchen, these are actually color photographs showing that the experience did move forward. Yeah, right, no, for sure. Music, all of those things. I think regardless of the format, it was really that sense of community that many of us feel where it was some of the most important elements of the program. It was almost as if you didn't have to learn anything, or you would learn by just naturally. The community was key, and it wasn't just eating together, it was sharing ideas, arguing, all of that. That was the artist in residency program. Oops, and I'm having a hard time with this. Just to wrap up, we had a pretty awesome time. We were lucky that while we were at Taliesin, we felt that we were the natural inheritors of the ideas of the Taliesin. This was a place built by students and could be enjoyed and used and learned by students. So with that, these are the happy faces of the people that we had that one, throughout the time that I was at the helm. And then I passed it on to Aaron Betsky when I felt that I needed to be an architect again and not an administrator. Aaron, about a year later, hired you, Chris, right? And the rest is history, so, or the rest is the present. Anyway, thank you so much.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah, so as Victor said, he was succeeded by Aaron Betsky, the prominent historian, curator, theorist, and he came in on as dean, and then I came in about a year later as the director of academic affairs, where at that time was equivalent to the dean's position, like Stephanie's position, to Aaron as head of school. And it was so we both came on board in a relatively rapid clip, and we were both coming from the outside in a way, and that we hadn't come through the program, we hadn't kind of lived there like Victor and John had, and Aaron was also hired to manage the transformation of the school. He was hired during a very significant period of change, and was hired to manage the transition from the school to an independent institution. Looking back at one of Victor's slide, his timeline, the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation was established during Wright's time, and from that time until 2017, the school had operated as was an operating department of the foundation. Around the end of Victor's tenure, our accreditors mandated that the school would now need to be independent for the first time in its history, which meant that the school would have to have its own governance, would have to be in charge of its own financials. And Jackie Lynn was instrumental in that transition as the chair of our board at that time, and we're so happy that you are still engaged with the school. It's great to see you. And so this was another period of just another instance of significant change in the history of the school, and again became this kind of opportunity for renewal, not a starting over, but a kind of renewal. And as a new institution, it was an opportunity, a requirement to renew the vision and the mission of the school at that time. And so for Aaron and I, following Aaron's lead, and I should say the input of the students, of the faculty, Matthew Trebetowski was still there. Alex was probably there. He was there. But kind of coming from the outside, it became an opportunity. It became a kind of meditation on the essence of the place, in our view, and kind of what makes it unique in the culture of architectural education. And it really had to do with. It came down to kind of thinking about Wright and his approach to experimental architecture and to its relevance in our contemporary world. And there was a couple of kind of key parts of the mission and vision that came out of it. One, we're here to change the world. We're building on Frank Lloyd Wright's designs and thoughts. So we're still building on that core kind of pedagogical impulse that goes back to 1932, and we're out to be the boldest experimental architecture program in the world. And so the design of the program really became about how, what does that mean? What does that mean to us, and what does that mean to our students in this contemporary architectural, in this contemporary context? And we decided that experimental architecture is rooted, just like Wright's practice was, not in the development of or a promotion of a style, but rather in a direct and experimental engagement with the world. Experimental architecture is about working with and on the world in order to transform it. Experimental architecture takes the world as it is and seeks to transform it by rearranging its parts. This putting old parts together in new ways, it's this rewiring of these existing dots that is the way that ideas and the discipline move forward. And it's also, this is where kind of creative progress in architecture or in anything mirrors John Dewey's kind of evolutionary naturalism, going back to the Chicago School at the turn of the last century. And following his thoughts, just as organisms develop through struggle with their environment, so do ideas and knowledge develop through struggle with the world. Conversation, discussions with one's peers is a kind of struggle that clarifies ideas and moves them forward. And democracy, then, is the societal systemization of this. And this thinking also leads to the structure of the education at the school, in that it's student-centered, not teacher-centered. Students aren't just there to receive the knowledge imparted by one's teacher. Students are the primary agent in their education through project-based engagement with the discipline and with the world. And then teachers, we are essentially well-prepared enablers of this student-centered learning. we try to structure processes through which students grow and learn by doing, and as an active agent of their own educations. And so Aaron coined the school's motto at the time, called Live Architecture, which is problematic because on the website you didn't know if it was live architecture or live architecture. But what it meant was that our job as educators were really to just kind of create a space, to create that environment where ideas can develop, where they can be generated, where they can be tested, and constantly revised. And so it was a lot about continuity, a lot about bringing forward the traditions of the past, and kind of clarifying within this kind of holistic learning by doing, live architecture approach. And a big part of that was this idea of public discussions. Aaron had an amazing Rolodex, and invited all of these world-class architects, designers, practitioners here to and cobbled together probably the best lecture series in the Valley for a while, for something we continue today, offering the best lecture series in the Valley. So this is Michael Beirut, the graphic designer at Taliesin Pavilion. This was a symposium that we convened on shelters, on the Taliesin shelters, the kind of tradition of Taliesin shelters, and was about kind of taking a hold of the intellectual and pedagogical nature of the shelter in preparation for bringing that project, that program forward. So there's Beatrice Colominian, there's Brian McKay Lyons, there's Rusty and Javier from Rural Studio. So we brought people together from all over the world for this kind of short symposium on the Taliesin shelter, the kind of Taliesin community, and basically about this kind of the immersive nature of our education. Then as now, the place, the community, was the thing to experience, to bring people here to experience and to comment on. It was about kind of extending the public discussion through the institution of a student publication. Wash magazine, established in 2016. Student authored and published often with the help of the Graham Foundation. The kind of the lectures and the public discussions that were happening live were extended into this publication, where students would the speakers would come and hang out for days. Patrick Schumacher was here for like a week. He would just drop it at classes. He wouldn't leave, and he was never on his phone. Like how does he run this big firm while just like hanging out with us with students for a week? Anyway, students would get a chance to hang out with these people. They'd interview them, and these interviews and a kind of extended presentation of the work and the kind of issues in it would form these kind of these thematic issues of Wash magazine, and it's something that is continuing on today, with the next issue being focused on the organic. We continued this immersive learning community through working in the kitchen, through students preparing meals, serving and being served every day, through with both within the community. This is a Thanksgiving gathering of students, the school, and some of the legacy fellows that still were at Taliesin West at that time and still are there. To more the continuation of the formals, where the school would open up to the community and invite in local professionals. Often this would follow a lecture or something, so the kind of global architecture community would come in, and students would have a chance to mix with them, to serve and be served, to learn how to drink in moderation, and so that they can learn how to network and kind of be a rehearsal for their careers. This is Jan Sabatka, who's cracking up at Eddie Jones and totally exasperating this woman in the middle with whatever he's saying. So he actually lived in the same shelter as John Sather when he was here. So it's the story of the School of Architecture is a school of constant change, but it's also a story of continuity, a story of evolution. Another ingredient is what is in this kind of learning environment is about immersion in the landscape and in the environment, and we kind of formalize that through the putting the shelter, formalizing the shelter building process as the capstone thesis of the school. Up until now, it had been a long-standing tradition that goes back to the building of Taliesin West and continued to be the main kind of student housing up until 2020. But now, looking back and kind of clarifying the essence of the place and what makes it unique, we decided to put this at the center of the program and at the center of an intellectual project where the shelter building is learning by doing, by building something with your own hands, by collaborating and leading your fellow students, teaching your fellow students in building something, but also the shelter is a kind of a prototype, a model of a larger thesis that's about the student's idea of how we might build and live in the modern world. And at times these ideas with so much room to percolate sometimes became more abstract, sometimes became more kind of challenging to the notion of say comfort and livability, but has kind of since become a real kind of flagship for the program and a draw for potential students and a kind of key component of this generation's learning by doing. The final kind of component is about learning beyond the classroom, and with the dissolution of Taliesin Associated Architects, the tradition in the school of interacting with clients, to operating in a professional environment, with operating and learning from design professionals from across the industry is still a very valuable way of learning, so we sought to continue that, but now through the idea of kind of working in and for and with communities. And so this was a kind of early project, a series of projects that we did in Globe and Miami that ranged from just kind of getting out there with the community, the students leading the community in just kind of beautification projects. This is a program called Paint the Town, to actual design and construction projects, working with local builders in Wisconsin at the Taliesin campus. This was a performance pavilion for Mesa Maney that we did in collaboration with Wix Building in a summer project. Going to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, between the Price Tower and Wesley Peters Community Center. They brought the school in to design a park that would connect those two buildings, and on this kind of intensive trip through a public design charrette, public listening sessions and design charrettes, the students came up with a series of designs for the park that was later built, and then evolving that idea in the latest iteration of the school toward specifically projects aimed at social justice, on economic development, on a kind of service learning for our students that will get them out into communities and specifically into engagement with people, with communities, with stakeholders whose perspectives might be different from their own, whose experiences might be different from their own, to kind of give them experience to open up their minds and imaginations, and to practice taking on some of the most urgent issues that are facing the profession and society today. This is a project, and it's also a vehicle for collaboration. This is a project in collaboration with the Carson Center for Emerging Media Arts to do an immersive kind of history project in a historic Black-owned beach community, to kind of tell the story through immersive experimental media types, but also to imagine the next generation of building in the community for climate resilient and affordable homes and institutions. Engagement with 2 years ago or so with a 5th generation Black-owned farm in North Carolina, where students went there and designed a kind of master plan for the next generation of kind of activity for this farm that involves an agricultural learning by doing program for at-risk youth that kind of learns from the Taliesin experience. Students did a master plan for the farm. They went to the site, to this festival, and presented it. There's Alex again. And with the idea that these student designs will provide material for further fundraising and eventual realization of the project, and then just kind of coming up to the current day, and this site, an engagement with the Scottsdale Department of Human Resources Brick by Brick project, to which they hire unhoused people to produce compressed earth blocks. First for kind of civic projects around the city, but eventually for affordable housing or kind of transitional housing for the community. And we are working with them to develop a prototype for a tiny house, a kind of proof of concept. And this is one iteration of that design by Alex that's cited for Cattletrack just over there. And then the tradition of learning by doing, by getting your hands in the dirt and experimenting with actual construction and actual materials and the realizations of these designs continues to our current time and to our current location, and we're looking forward to what comes next. Stephanie's going to tell us about that right now.
I'm going to keep this relatively short since I want to make sure we have ample time for questions. I'm going to talk about the kind of latest iteration of the school through the lens of experimental pedagogy, which we've been talking about. As Chris, Victor, and John have all expressed in their own ways, the school has really given students a space and a structure and a timeline to explore ideas together, to go outside of the box, and to really be engaged with the public sphere, to try things that they've never tried before, and to not be burdened by failure. What happens outside of that structure is as important and perhaps even more important than what happens inside of it. We've been poking fun at Alex this whole time for extending his timeline beyond the typical timeline and structure of a normal institution, and in a way, it's a radical response to the box, the confines of the box. And I'm also showing this slide because this is a project that happened led by Daniel Ayat, our history and theory faculty. It's a renovation of a shelter project, but not done through the shelter program. It was something that happened almost, I want to say almost spontaneously, and through the engagement of the community, not only students, but also the Arco Santi community where this project happened. It really came together. So the idea that this framework can inspire things that are not predetermined and not expected is a really important aspect of this program, and we are constantly encountering the unexpected. I started at the school in 2021, January of 2021. The pandemic was peaking. The school had recently relocated from Taliesin and Taliesin West to Arco Santi, and I was a little shocked at the beginning. There were 7 students, 1 teaching fellow who also served as a student services coordinator. There was a school car, but at the time it didn't really matter because I didn't drive, so I was really stuck there, stranded, fully immersed. But what really struck me was this sense of camaraderie among faculty, students, and staff alike. So across all levels of the community, everyone really came together. And I like this image because you can't really tell who's faculty and who's a student. You can try to guess, but unless you know these people, you wouldn't really be able to tell. I received an invitation to work in the studio alongside the students, which I thought it was unfamiliar to me at the time, coming from maybe more formal institutions. But I quickly accepted, even more quickly learned the sleeping habits, eating habits, allergies, other types of preferences you would never want to know of your own students, and we became a group. We became a family, and that family continues. One thing that we're always faced with is the constant change. It's something that has happened over the decades, and something that I've been thinking about during my time in TSOA leadership is how the curriculum can really respond to and leverage this change. Some say we're building the plane as we fly it, but I think this is actually a really radical way of being, and a way of always staying on your feet, always staying current, being adaptive, and being creative with what you have. And I don't think we would be the school that we are without this kind of challenge. And the students really take ownership of that. There isn't a single student that has joined the school that didn't expect some level of this ownership of their own experience. They're producing it and not just consuming it. I want to give a big shout out to our faculty who are here as well, also to illustrate the small size of the school that we are. I'm interested in the kind of pragmatics of how we operate an institution and how a small size can really enable some of the more radical things to happen. Our staff is even smaller, and being down here in Scottsdale has allowed us to be in the same room together for the first time in a while. Speaking of pragmatics, when I started, Chris casually dropped the impending accreditation visit that we were going to have to go through. He was already dealing with a change of location, a change of name, petition to add another degree path, the MR2. And he was like, by the way, there's also a NAB visit. But by the way, there's also the HLC visit that comes before that. And the NAB visit got moved up by a year. So this is something that we were kind of rapidly adjusting to as soon as I got there. And one of the first projects that we took on with the input of the faculty and with the input of the students was to distill the core values of the school. These are terms that you've seen before. These are terms that we always use, but to really define them as outcomes through the curriculum, through the co-curriculum, and also through infrastructure and resources. So how are we actually delivering these as outcomes within the program? Learning by doing refers to the interactive experiences, the engagement with real-world problems and real-world projects. I don't know why I'm losing my voice. I haven't really been talking for that long. Material knowledge and experimentation, that's the get your hands dirty outcome, but also recognizing, like, you know, the labor, the techniques, the materials, how they're all embodied within a larger constellation of social, cultural, and environmental practices. And of course, the immersive learning, which we've been touching on throughout the presentations, and how that's really a distinctive part of the education. And it does work. It is challenging because you're living with your students. Just as a piece of context, the students and I and Daniel all live in the same building. This has been a tradition of the school for decades, and we've been trying to continue that as much as possible through this latest iteration. And you know, it really produces a kind of bond and a kind of collective problem solving that is at another level that I haven't seen before. The curriculum really builds up students' skills, knowledge, conversation, leadership, and collaboration towards the final shelter project, which is the thesis project. This has been touched on in the previous presentation, so I won't explain what it is. And community life is also baked in. It's now more formally defined through specific activities, such as joy list or weekly maintenance, events, weekly dinners. This happened as recently as a couple weeks ago. Shelter assistance, which provides students with the opportunity to be mentored and to learn skills around construction, but also impart their own knowledge to their fellow students. So this kind of reciprocity with the community is really baked into this requirement. And also student government. Every student is a part of student government, and the student government engages the board, it engages the wider professional community through the AIA, and students also sit on the academic council and have input on the curriculum. So the student voice is strong, and we really embrace this through as leadership. And we have a lot of fun. Community life is not just an obligation. It is, it's a way of bonding to really break the ice with students and faculty, and it leads to crazy things sometimes. The shelter thesis, I'll just add a few notes that it has opened up in its definition since the school has moved to Arcosanti, really engaging wider community issues. This is Richard Shelter, who built he built his shelter in collaboration with the agriculture department. And as a school that's constantly undergoing change within a world that's undergoing a lot of change, I think it is extremely important that students start to tackle these problems within their own education and start to think about them and connect them to design and the responsibility of building. As another example of how shelters have opened up, that we've also gotten some outdoor theaters in the last generation. And then Christopher's shelter, Careful Attention, which maybe intentionally or not intentionally has been a direct reflection on the transition that's been happening at the school. He prefabricated his shelter at Cattletrack, assembled it at Arcosanti. It was a big success. People really came up to it with curiosity and used it for gathering and contemplation. And then this fall he's bringing it, he has brought it back to Cattletrack and will be reassembling it at our new campus. And this kind of mobility has really been like a symptom of what the larger changes that were going on at the time. There's Christopher. I might just kind of flip through these slides. It's going to be a rapid image fire. But integrating experiences between studio and co-curricular life is another kind of effort that's ongoing right now, where students are paying attention to the environment, the changes, the climatic changes that we're very rapidly facing. Activities with guest lecturers have been integrated with the studio thinking. So students went down to the Agua River and interacted with the environment through sculpture. Materiality has been explored through site visits, and the ability to connect with our campus as a primary source continues. This is Harris doing her Materiality Matters assignment at Cattletrack. The kind of work, the kind of creativity that comes out of making these connections, connecting the dots between curricular life, co-curricular life, architecture as a lifestyle, has been really, really impressive to me. So if environment is the focus for the first studio, society and housing becomes the focus of the second studio. Students increasingly densify single-family homes, kind of critique the canon of single family, and also learn from their housing, for better or for worse, and react to it through their own projects. So we learned a lot of lessons from Arcosanti, the communal living environment, the always being exposed. This is Nick's dorm that I would constantly walk into as if it were a public space, but it wasn't. But that was, it just became that because of the way that the campus was structured. And we've continued that, not so much bringing public space into a private space, but bringing domesticity into our studio environment and practicing the care and upholding of our very special culture within the school. And again, the kind of output that comes out of this is work that recently won the AIA Arizona Pedagogy Award. And then we finally land at Studio 3, our future campus. So this lecture, this roundtable is really integrated. This is part of the student studio experience. They will be asked to participate in the roundtable that follows. Setting up this event is part of your research, you know, becoming familiar, immersing yourself in the spaces that you will be designing or reacting to. This is part of your research. Community life is part of your research. Literally crafting the school is part of your research. So this is such an exciting time for the school. We're really excited to be so engaged and back in civilization, and I mean a different civilization, and as has been suggested before, you know, there is this continuum, there's a core continuum and a spirit that that has threaded itself through the many iterations of the school, students building their own futures. And there's a series of images of people on roofs, optimistic. This is also a roof. And here we are landed on the ground and really ready to tackle the next phase. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask the speakers to please take a seat at the table, and we'll follow with a discussion. I'll start off with some questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience. Everyone comfortable? Does anyone want water, club soda? Drink? Yeah. Club soda, please. Could somebody bring a few?
Where are they?
In the back. Okay. Well, I really appreciate everyone meeting before this event to kind of talk about the themes and the common values that have been part of each generation and iteration of the school. One of the themes that really came up is transition, and I would ask the speakers about maybe in your mind what was the most important transition and how did that impact your relationship with the school or your outlook on the school's future.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just shoot from the hip. And one thing that I found quite interesting was this dynamic between the individual and the community. We talk a lot about the community. It's all of us. It's the identity that we have. But I felt that being an individual was also equally important, and it's that dichotomy between the two, the fact that we have these wonderful communal spaces at the Taliesin, but that you also have the shelter, which was that individualistic element. And I don't know if that quite captures what you're describing, but I think it is fascinating to understand that being constantly in a community can actually be really exhausting. And that you need the flip side of that in order to I think have a sane existence. So you would see students burn out because they were constantly helping out, working in the studio together with different projects, and then here and there, and until they had that moment on their own, that time, that peaceful place that was just them and self-reflecting, it was impossible for them to have that balance. So that was almost, there were moths to a flame, and you also need to not have a flame. It was something that I thought was interesting and potentially something that could be considered as you're looking at programming the next phase of the school.
The transition, and I'm not sure I'll answer this in the same kind of way, but you did, but and once again, I'm going to say that the answers to this come from different eras. So each of the eras, and that's kind of the history of the school, is that it transitioned so much so through the years. But when we lived there as a student, we lived in a total isolated bubble. In my era, we lived there the whole time. We were there 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the whole time we were there. And so the transition into the real world was extremely difficult. For my partner, Vern, who had been there 23 years, it was almost crippling. For me, it was very eye-opening in that I had gone there with very little architectural experience, had realized that in my time there, I had to grasp education myself. As Wright said, I'm not here to be your teacher. You're really here to learn from me and help me. And so it wasn't one of sitting to the side and having things thrown at you. You had to, you really had to learn by doing, as we've repeated many times. But what ultimately, and I think this plays into the pedagogy of the future, is the isolation of Taliesin, I think, was probably very problematic in the years, in that when you came out and you ultimately then went into practice, you were just beginning to experience the world in a way that you probably should have had more integration with through the years. And so as I think about the future of the school and transition, having just come from Taliesin just last week, I mentioned I brought my office there. You're isolated in this incredibly beautiful estate of rights, and you're totally isolated from the rest of the world, and you're living, quite frankly, a very luxurious life. To some degree, the same is true at Taliesin West. When I showed you the picture of the red roof pavilion I lived in, people now pay $5 and $10 million for the same view that I had, but we never went into the city and really, we stayed alone. So now I began to think, is the school the future? Should it be as isolated, or should it be much more integrated into more of an urban environment? So I think this transition here to Cattletrack is really interesting, because in the era of Arcosanti, you were also still totally isolated. Now you're not. You move about the community. It's easily accessed, and I think that's going to actually, as that evolves, and wherever the school ultimately continues to evolve, that's going to be a very important part in the training and the future of the young students who come out.
I'd be interested in hearing the student perspective on this, the transition from, this is kind of linking both of your responses, in the transition from Arcosanti to Cattletrack, a more isolated location that was also much more communal, almost overexposed, to a location in which you have the space for your own individuality and own kind of privacy. How would this ideally be balanced in a future iteration of the school? And do you want to use the mic, or you just okay?
I'll add. Can everyone hear? Hi, I'm Mariah. I'm a second-year student, so I started last year at Arcosanti. I've been familiar with the school for many years before. I lived here in the Valley, very to that point, I think I knew what I was getting into in terms of starting the school at Arcosanti, and I think it was a benefit to me to have my first year in such an immersive environment. I think it was something that, as challenging as it was, kind of that forced communal experience, did have a lot of opportunity for me, and I think that it allowed me to appreciate being in this campus now. So the remoteness, the kind of forced experiences together, the shared meals. I mean, you really had to plan to get groceries once a week, with everyone, because the nearest grocery store was an hour away, and so you had to schedule it. And if you're the only one with a car, or you really have to kind of balance those things out. And we I think got closer as a school through it, and but now being here, I can appreciate the convenience in a different way, and also we can choose to come together more intentionally. So the opportunity for dinners or things of that nature, I think, are a bit more intentional. But I think as we're in Studio 3, imagining our future campus and what that could look like and what it means and what space we would need and why, I do like the idea of maintaining first year as kind of maybe the most connected in terms of physical siting. Maybe you still live in a shelter or a former shelter on your first year, to really kind of gain that immersive experience. Just immediately, soak it all in, and then maybe transition to kind of more of your independent living situation, at least for the first years. That's just something that we talk a lot about in our precedent studies and envisioning a campus here potentially. So that's my experience as a student who started at Arcosanti last year, transitioning here. But curious how other students feel about that.
I'm Nick. I'm also a second year student here. Also went through living at Arcosanti for the last year. And I think I agree to some extent. It's hard to be as closed off in a place that's away from everything, but at the same time you gain a certain perspective. I think everyone's different as well. Personally, I'm quite insular myself, and I found a comfort of kind of being out in the middle of nowhere for extended periods of time. But there's comfort in different aspects in living so much more of an urban area as well. I think also, speaking of the nomadic nature of the school, I think that it's almost necessary to be thrust into this kind of place out in the middle of nowhere where all you do is architecture, and it's also important to move away from that and back and forth. I think it's part of the history and part of what makes us special is changing not only where we are, but how we see things, either each year or each semester.
Yeah, that's great. And to that point, maybe as a kind of another facet to the last question, how is change kind of programmed into your education at Taliesin? And we talk about the constant change that's really embedded in the program. What was encouraged to be kind of discovered and explored, and how did you kind of embrace that? Is that?
So, as Victor said, my era was a little bit more of a free-for-all.
Right. Yeah.
Highly
Guess that's what I was
structured
doing.
We were totally structured.
What was interesting is we had kind of periods of time where we did intensive construction. So several of the buildings at Taliesin West, I helped build. We'd go out into the desert, collect the big rocks, smoke a little dope along the way, and come back and mix some concrete and build the walls. And we would do that for, maybe 3 months at a time. And then you would rotate into, say, the drafting. And so that the structure was there, but it was a little bit loose. So your encouragement was also a little bit of your own finding because of what was there as a tool. So first off, you have the asset of tremendous talent around you all the time. Fine artists, dancers, musicians, philosophers, architects, cooks, potters, weavers, all those things were all part of the community that I was part of. And so you would seek out certain things that might be of interest to you. And what was so interesting is it all began to weave together that this really is the life of an architect. All of these different aspects, ultimately you would begin to feel are going to be important in my future. And to the young students, after being in practice now for 45 years, I can tell you every single one of those things has come back to play. And so, should I have learned other things when I left? There was a period of time because of licensing and things like that I felt I didn't know enough about structural engineering or contracts, things that just weren't attended to at Taliesin. So I had to seek those out. But that whole variety of life. And so now that you're here in the city, and I was in a totally insular bubble of Taliesin, West and Taliesin, Wisconsin, I think those things become more easy to obtain because of you're now in a city, and so they're just at your fingertips. But you have to, they're not going to come to you, you have to go to them.
And you mentioned it was much more structured.
Well, I think it's comparatively structured. I've been a freshman at ASU in the architecture program that Ellen now runs. It was a wonderful experience. It was your classic first year college experience. And then I decided to take a year off and spend a year at Taliesin. And it was like going from the world of black and white to a world in color. It was one that was, maybe it had been flat and it turned into a three-dimensional, immersive experience. It was something that I think was alive in a way that the other was, not that it was dead, but there was a certain way things were going on. And of course, a freshman experience is not the same as a senior experience. But I think the point is that it's not just an order of magnitude; it's a completely different experience. I think there was a mention of being a consumer versus a producer, and I think I felt like I was a producer when I was an apprentice or a student, whereas as a freshman at ASU, I felt I was just consuming as much as I was working on my own projects. There was still that sense of being another number that was ultimately going to graduate when my number was called. And so I think that idea, that stark contrast that I saw, ultimately it goaded me into continuing all of my years at Taliesin for my architectural experience. And it was just as John was mentioning. I mean, there was such a immersive feel to it. There was also that cyclical element, which I think is not something to be ignored. I showed you that graphic of the round circle that kind of transitioned between Wisconsin and Arizona, and I think it would be interesting as you think of the future of the school. Is it in how do you make it cyclical, or is there an element of cyclical nature? And I mean, you guys are probably done with transition because you've been going from one place to the other, but perhaps you can embrace it and enjoy it. And I always remember this kind of feeling of expectation in the weeks preceding the migration that we had. And I would say embrace it rather than feel like it is something to be avoided or grudgingly accepted. So there's a lot, but it's I think there's in some way or another attempts to answer your question.
Yeah.
But I could. I was just thinking, 'cause I remember the migration going from Wisconsin to Arizona every year was in some ways it was really disruptive.
Oh yeah.
You know, when I was talking about, in our era, it was about kind of taking stock of what really makes this place unique, what we can really offer and highlight this in terms of a unique kind of education. One of those was the shelters and living in the shelters, which is super valuable. But before, late October, like this time of year, like living in a desert shelter without air conditioning or water, it's just like a non-starter. So we'd be in Wisconsin for the summer, and then through most of the fall, and then in the middle of everything, we'd have to pick up and move across the country, and we'd always lose 3 weeks. It's a 1 week migration, but it's kind of one week kind of in anticipation, and another week getting settled, and it just blew apart the whole fall semester. But what we tried to figure out is this thing about what's different and what persists. And so doing a project for in the studio where you first in Wisconsin, and within that environment and within that particular biome, and then doing the same project in the desert became really valuable because of the transition as a kind of creative force. And this idea of migration, of transition, and more largely this kind of embracing dynamic change as a fountain of creativity, I think is a really interesting idea to keep at the center of our thinking as we think about what the next version of the school is. So I live in Tucson, near to the Biosphere 2, which was this experiment in creating a hermetically sealed environment to experiment with and design for eventually for life on other planets. And there was the initial Biosphereans, which were a group of engineers and astronauts and stuff who lived in the biosphere for a while. The experiment eventually failed but for all these unexpected reasons. Like the trees that were planted in the biospheres wouldn't thrive; they all died. And at first, they couldn't figure out why. They had all the water and soil that they needed. They replanted the trees; they died again. And what they figured out was that within the biosphere, there's no wind. And for these trees to grow strong, they needed the resistance of a dynamic and challenging environment. And this notion of dynamic change being the only constant, and a kind of conscious strive toward challenging oneself in order to grow, I think is a kind of constant of the Taliesin and the School of Architecture experience, and kind of foundation of the pedagogy once we become comfortable, if we ever stop moving, if we ever become comfortable, if we ever cease to challenge ourselves, then we'll cease to grow. So this kind of maybe we should, like Stephanie was talking about, embrace. Maybe this is the time to embrace change, to embrace dynamism, and kind of rootlessness as a kind of fundamental aspect of the school itself, and the learning process is kind of.
So let me add on to that a little bit. So when I was at Taliesin just last week, and Taliesin was probably several months ago for some reason, in kind of thinking about tonight and thinking about the future of the school, and kind of evaluating, okay, I lived here, I learned here, I lived in Arizona, I learned in Arizona. One of the things that I came across in my own mind was it was a really comfortable life, and maybe it was too comfortable. Maybe it wasn't as uncomfortable as it needed to be. And I look at my practice now. Architecture is a tough business. It's one where it's demanding in time, it's demanding in concentration, creativity, thought, effort. And I thought about the luxury of the living room at Taliesin West and the beauty of that magnificent piece of architecture, and you kind of, rode the coattails of all of that. Well, now you don't have that. And maybe that's really good for the future of a dynamically changing world and the future of the school, and rethinking it. There was a time when, as young students, we'd sit out at the Point or somewhere at Taliesin West and look at all the emerging tract homes coming closer and closer and closer, and the power lines are already there to destroy the view. And we used to just dream of what would Wright do? Would he just kind of, let all this come up to the doorstep? And, you'd kind of laughingly say, no, he'd probably go off and create Taliesin 3 in Guatemala or somewhere, right? Well, this isn't Guatemala. It isn't bad. It's an incredible environment you're in now. But the embracing of change is a learned skill that architects need to have, and you're living it now, and so that's an interesting part to this whole maybe even the pedagogy of the future, is that there is built-in change, that there's built-in disruption. I have a client who is thought to be the top venture capitalist of the world. He's all about disrupting everything. He funded and began Uber, so he disrupted the whole taxi cab industry. And he's got a litany of these things that have made him this multi-billionaire just by embracing change, but also kind of forced disruption. And so as I think about the school of the future, I would like it to be, in Mockbee's words, be bold and proceed, and really love change. And that's what we're into now.
Can I ask a question? To follow up to that, first of all, thank you all so much. I think this is a really productive and contextualizing conversation for us to have, all those generations speaking to this. So I really appreciate that. I'm curious specifically for each of you if you feel like there were specific traditions or maybe specific spaces that in your experience you think are worth either intentionally maintaining, preserving, or that you feel that we should, we are okay to shed or leave at the door as we proceed. So any specific, we talked about the box project, we talked about the migration, we talked about being in isolation. So if there's any specific, because each, I think, generation also has their own specific traditions, maybe that kind of folded into that. So I'm curious, as we think about what our next space could need, it's helpful to understand what, curious.
Well, I know I'll tell you what I
Yeah.
think, and I'm sure you'll agree. The kitchen's the most important thing, right? And we would, a faculty would come or go, and no one would bat an eye. But a cook would, or chef would leave, and it would all hell broke loose as a result. And it just, I think, it was emblematic of how important that is. And we all know about how important the kitchen is for reasons that go way beyond the material food of it. So I would just say, yeah, whatever you do, don't ignore the role of the kitchen, and don't be afraid to make that the center of the campus in the same way that it was at Taliesin West. And you would notice that going between Wisconsin and Arizona campus, where the Wisconsin, the kitchen was down below in the basement, in effect, and in Arizona it was at the hub. I think Wright learned from that Wisconsin situation and replaced it with, and he also realized that in any good campsite, the center of activity happened also around the fire or around the place where the food was. So I would say that things to shed, that's a harder question, and I don't have the answer.
Well, some of the easy ones to shed were, and it's changed. When Mrs. Franklin Wright was alive, we were basically her servants. So we served her, you heard you probably heard some of these stories. There was parts of Taliesin that in my era, it's really tough to understand. But when I was just up there recently and there were, paid tour guides and things, I was telling my staff, we used to give the tours. But giving the tours taught me public speaking. I very early on learned how to speak in front of 30 people. Well, that's a very important tour. Playing around in the shop, I grew up, I didn't have all those things. I didn't have table saws and skill saws. So I used to hang out down there with Arnold Roy, who was one of the Wright apprentices who kind of controlled the shop. They're all the aspects of running a facility were important. But then there are the cultural pieces. In our time, there were some very important people who came and went. The first night I was there, first Saturday night there, to the right of me was Mrs. Henry Kaiser from all of Kaiser, all the industries of California, and Claire Booth Luce, whose husband was on Time Magazine. And so there was that kind of socialization, which became really important to me because architecture, we like to say our firm serves the haves and the have-nots. So we deal with some of the wealthiest people on earth, and we deal with some of the poorest people. And so kind of being able to speak to both of those cultures is really important. Community is really important. Being able to live together and to learn in a very close environment was always really important to me. And we were a lot closer than you ever were. Even though we had, as Victor started his out, the sheepherder's tent, when I just, there were 2 summers I lived in Hillside, or Midway Farm at Taliesin in what was called the Bridge. And we lived in literally bunk after bunk in a very tight quarters. And that began to, really teach me about dealing with human beings in very close proximity. So that was important. One of the traditions that we started work really early in the morning. And so in our time, we often were in the drafting room at 6 a.m. And until 10 at night. And that was, from a pure work ethic, that was something that was really important. You will never have enough time in your life to know what you need to know to be an architect. And so you have to really embrace that and realize that devoting a large amount of time of your life to learning architecture, as many of us say, this is not a job. It's a call, and you really have to give your all to architecture, to go into deep thought, deep work, to really focus on creating great buildings. So that's just a few of the things, but there are actually very few things in the life that I experienced there that I was never called upon to use in my professional practice.
Yeah, I don't know if it's about what should be changed, what should be shed, something from students serving the leaders of the school. Maybe this is something that should be brought back. But I think in my experience,
We tried it, it didn't work.
in my experience, it's more about kind of continuing to challenge your kind of givens, continue to challenge to rethink these traditions. Things like community, things like hands-on learning, things like professional engagement. I think these will continue to be valuable well into the future, but the kind of the context within which they're adapted, the responses to the contemporary condition that they might serve, those things might change. So I think like we, when Taliesin Architects folded, we pivoted to a kind of a community design orientation, and when we moved from Taliesin to Arcosanti, the shelter program opened up. It was still about thinking through living and building in the modern world. It's still about building something with your hands, but maybe now it can be you can embrace these other formats. It can be about building for yourself or for the community, for some combination. So I think these kind of pedagogical constants, I think will probably always be useful, but always need to be renewed, refreshed.
I want to be sensitive to time, so I'm going to ask one more question that can be taken in many different directions. This one has to do with duration. So Victor, you touched on the kind of cycles of migration that define the student experience. We've touched a few times on Alex's own duration at the school. And this is something that we talk about in terms of the shelter building. The studio that Matthew is leading on the future of the school has been extended beyond one semester to take 2 semesters, because that's you can't do everything that we're trying to do within the confines of a typical one semester studio model. And both of you stayed at Taliesin for more than 3 years. People tend to stay as long as they can, if they can. Of course, there are policies that we have to address around that. But we have a 3-year program. We also have a 2-year program. It's almost not enough. I'm wondering how you think of the duration of your experience, and if that was enough. I mean, you talked about never having enough time to learn the things that you need to learn. Why do people stay at TSOA for as long as they do? And what kind of
There was a time, and this kind of came with the luxury of beauty of living at Taliesin West. Aaron Betsky used to say it's a good place to hang out. In my time, I would say we had maybe just under 30 students. Probably 5 of them were hanger-outers, and the rest of them were really felt privileged to be there, felt that they were in an extremely special place at a very special time, and they better take advantage of it. So we were serious students. But, whether I should have stayed there 10 years or my partner stayed 23 years, what it did is it sparked what is sometimes an overused term of lifelong learning. It began that in me. And I ferocious lifelong learner. And what I felt, I didn't know it at the time, but something inside of me told me it was time to leave. I didn't leave because, Mrs. Wright had said bad things to me. I was leaving, incredible stuff. Wes Peters was at his high point. Vern Swaback was doing great things. The whole litany of Cornelia was there. We were just in a real heyday, but something inside of me told me it was time to leave and to learn other things. So I knew enough. I had that. I knew there were things not just in Kamal Amin was the main structural engineer, but he really wasn't teaching us the depth of structural engineering that we needed. Tom Casey was the mechanical engineer. He was teaching it, but not to the depth. So I really left there knowing that, okay, this is the rest of my life that I have to keep learning. And you would think after 45 years of practice that you kind of have done it all, and you've learned it all. And I wake up every day almost in a panic that I don't know enough, and so I better stay at it even more and do it in my way now, which is, I won't go into it, but a very unique way. I live in 7 different homes, and it's because not that I want 7 homes, it's that each one of them thrusts me into different cultures. So I'm in Manhattan and I'm just understanding what I call the PhD of urbanism. I may be in far southern Mexico, in the state of Chiapas, understanding poverty. And so that's my life, my way of living, learning. And that's what I think the longevity piece is all about. Even now, I'm beginning a project, which I really am under an NDA, can't talk about, but it's for some big company and they are creating a whole community totally based on lifelong learning. So rather than have golf courses and things that DC Ranch or these other communities have, our centerpiece is going to be a campus of discovery. And it's going to be a place where there's lifelong learning experiences in many different ways as the core of a very large community, 4,000 projected population. So it's, that is you're beginning that life, and it isn't going to be over when you leave here.
Anything I would say would sound trite, I think, but I mean, we noticed that 3 years was kind of the sweet spot for students in terms of the program. Some could do it quicker, as you indicated. What I do think it was fascinating was every once in a while we would invite one of our recent graduates back, and that was, I think that was really, and it was by invitation. It was kind of an award. It was a reward for being exemplary. And I think the opportunity to bring that person in is good. It's a nice connection point between the old guys like us and your peers. I don't know, it worked really well in a number of cases. So I would encourage at least a space for that. But I should also say that you don't want to only bring in people who've gone through the program. You want to intermix that with people from a completely different experience base. And that was what was so wonderful about the visiting scholar program that Elena, you were part of, and a number of other wonderful people were part of. Was bringing that level, kind of either a recent graduate or a mid-career professional or someone who was on the ascendant part of their arc into the school. And I think that was one of the great elements, and I would hope that you could do that so that it's not. In so many schools, you have this kind of duality where it's either a student or the teacher, but having someone in between or multiple people in between, I think really enriches the experience.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any concluding comments from the students? Alex?
call to that place, and that's what I feel. You know, that's why I'm here. I know it's why all of the other students here right now are here still. It's maybe not so much our building or our place, because we don't really have one. It's really I don't know, it's something within you, and you know that that thing still exists. Maybe not in a physical form, you know, at Taliesin or Taliesin West, but it still exists within, I would say, the spirit of John and everyone, you know, who's gone to the school before, and Victor, of course. You know, that's why I'm still here. And also, I'm not here to run through life. I'm not here to get here just to get to the end. Like we were saying that Vern Swaback was at Taliesin for 23 years. So I mean, I've just been here for a blink of time.
And Isabella, you've actually been here for just a blink of time in Paris as well. Anything to build on regarding that, the question?
What question?
Yeah. The question was concluding thoughts. But I mean, we've been talking about the kind of duration and the value that you find, kind of difference that you find in the educational experience, and
Can I say
how that.
something? Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
I really enjoy what you just mentioned, Alex, and these ideas of duration. I always remember the night in the pavilion, receiving Aaron Betsky and you leaving, and I was shocked that night because I think the transition has never happened. Actually, that's probably something that we should think about. I think it was a shock for all of us, everything that has happened, and we need to heal that transition somehow, because I've seen that over and over. But I remember we were performing something at night in our formal for receiving, and I remember me and a student, we recited Bambino Joe about Taliesin, and I remember that we stood up and we performed that, and I knew that then I was going to be fired for the things that I was going to say, but it's exactly what you are saying, Alex, like and there is this moment in the Bambino Joe when Taliesin, who's a poet, or they are a poet, is saying, I was, I am, and I will always be. And I think that, building on this, I think that Taliesin is not about the plays, it's about the individuals that using the background of whatever plays, they manifest. So I can tell you that I manifested in a way, but it's exactly what the students they think. It's about them. It's about actually each one of them. And I think that as running the monster, which is on the other side now, we actually admire what you're doing, and I think that it would be very nice to help you looking at yourself, because you're amazing. Because in this world where we don't know what we are doing, you are building your own microtopia. And you are giving the students the possibility in a world without maps to draw their own map where they're going to say, I want to do this. I have a student from our program that is going to move into your program because, but not because it's like this. This place is for someone, but it's not for everyone. And this is what makes you so special in a world of globalization. You have your own microtopias. But it doesn't matter what place, because Taliesin tonight, you mentioned many times, it's next. And I remember the other day I was with Stuart at Taliesin West, because we were trying to bring some light, because the shelters are falling apart. And so we as SU, we're very worried. And so he sent me then a text about Taliesin West, Taliesin Next, and I think that I would like to to you if you never read it. It was the plan for Frank Bergman to leave. That beauty, because it's true, we never left, and probably that's the problem. Now you are leaving, and you have an amazing courage. Actually, you should go to Tucson so you start to drive less. But thank you so much, and especially for voicing the individual aspect, which is not belonging to us. So thank you for echoing my thinking on
The Taliesin spirit, right? And many conversations in the Advocate, like, that just was a thing.
And Taliesin is not a place, it's a poet, it's a person, it's a system of people writing this incredible book that everybody should read.
No, that's profound. I appreciate you mentioning that. That's very important. And I think it's a next level, because during our period of time, our experience was so wrapped up in the place. It was impossible to imagine that the idea could persist beyond. So that's one of the bold hypotheses in a way of what's going on now.
It's super bold.
Yeah.
One last parting thought is, this inspires me lately almost every morning when I wake up. Wright was in his 70s when he started Taliesin West. And just think of that. Think of people you know who are 70. And think of, and that hit me when I was sitting in his great living room last week in Wisconsin, going, the comfort level here is just astounding. The views to the hills and the cornfields and things is just stunning. And all of a sudden, at 70, he comes to the desert, and there's the great article, the famous telegram about bring the shovels and by the way, bring your violins. And so he embraced change even that late in his life. And so the inspiration of the future here, to me, is, it took me a while to get over the transition. But now I'm like, okay, let's get on with it. And what exciting thing is out there? This is a great place to be, because what Jamie has brought to Cattletrack and the collection of individuals is just stunning. And so it's just, it's another chapter in the future of the school. So I'll stop.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. And we have a time limit, but if you want to join us for a reception.
Heading out.
Thank you.